He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just shoved me and said, "That's my dad's seat. Not yours." And in that moment, I realized I might never truly belong in the life of the woman I love. I remember thinking that night felt ordinary, almost peaceful. The house smelled like roasted garlic and rosemary before I even knocked. Through the front window, warm yellow light spilled onto the porch like an invitation. Soft jazz drifted from inside, something slow and old-fashioned, the kind of music that made everything feel more intimate than it really was. She opened the door before I could knock twice. At 43, she carried herself with a quiet kind of confidence. Not loud. Not demanding. Just steady. She wore a simple cream sweater that fell gently over her curves, sleeves pushed up slightly as if she'd been cooking. Her dark hair was loosely tied back, a few soft strands framing her face. She looked effortless, graceful in a way that didn't try too hard. "You made it," she said softly, and for a second, her eyes warmed in that private way they only did with me. I was 25, suddenly aware of how young I probably looked standing in her doorway. I dressed carefully, dark jeans, button-down shirt, something that said I respected the room I was stepping into. Inside, the table was already set. Plates neatly arranged. Candles lit, their flames flickering gently in the glow. Her son was there, quiet, scrolling through his phone at the far end of the table. He barely glanced at me. I told myself that was normal. Teenagers don't exactly roll out welcome banners. Dinner began smoothly enough. She moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, brushing past me once, her fingers grazing lightly against my lower back as she reached for a serving spoon. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it grounded me. Reassured me. When we finally sat down, I chose the chair beside her without thinking. Our knees brushed under the table. It was small. Subtle. But I felt it, that shared awareness. She didn't move away. Instead, her hand rested lightly on her thigh, close enough that if either of us shifted just slightly, our fingers would touch. I started to relax. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was how it began. Not dramatic acceptance. Not some grand speech. Just quiet integration. Slow belonging. Then it happened. A sharp pressure hit my shoulder. Not playful. Not accidental. I turned, startled. Her son was standing there now, jaw tight, eyes hard in a way that didn't match his age. "That's my dad's seat," he said flatly. "Not yours." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. The silence that followed was louder than anything else in the room. I felt every muscle in my body go still. Across the table, she froze. The serving spoon in her hand hovered mid-air. I saw it, the flicker in her eyes. Shock. Conflict. Guilt. No one spoke. I could have argued. Could have defended myself. Could have said I didn't know. Instead, I stood up slowly. My chair scraped softly against the wooden floor. "I think I left something in the car," I said, though we all knew I hadn't. I didn't look at her when I walked out. I couldn't. The cool night air hit my face as the door closed behind me. And for the first time since loving her, I felt like I didn't just lack a seat at the table, I lacked a place in the story altogether. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there in the dark, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The porch light was still on behind me, casting a soft glow across the driveway. For a second, I almost expected the front door to open. Almost expected her to come running out. It didn't. I exhaled slowly and turned the key. The engine hummed to life, steady, indifferent. Unlike me. As I drove, the neighborhood blurred into shadows and streetlights. Each yellow glow streaked across my windshield, disappearing just as quickly as it appeared. Like chances. Like moments. I wasn't angry at him. That was the worst part. He wasn't wrong to protect something that felt sacred to him. A seat at a dinner table shouldn't matter that much, Unless it represents someone who used to fill it. Someone bigger. Someone permanent. I tightened my grip on the wheel. I'd always known loving her meant stepping into a space that wasn't empty. There were memories in those walls. Photographs tucked into drawers. Stories I hadn't lived through. I respected that. I never tried to erase it. But tonight, for the first time, I felt the weight of comparison. I was 25. Still building my life. Still figuring out who I was becoming. Her world was already built. Established routines. A son nearly grown. A history I could never compete with. A part of me wondered if that's what everyone else saw when we walked into a room together. Not connection. Not the quiet understanding between us. Just the gap. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. Her name. The screen glowed in the dark car like a small heartbeat. I stared at it until it stopped ringing. A minute later, it lit up again. I let it ring this time too. Not because I didn't want to hear her voice. But because I didn't trust myself not to break the second I did. I pulled over near an empty park and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise. I leaned back in the seat, running a hand through my hair. Maybe I'd misread everything. Maybe I was just convenient. A companion in the quiet hours. Someone who made her feel young again. Someone who didn't come with baggage or shared history or complicated grief. But not someone who had a permanent chair at her table. I remembered the first time she'd reached for my hand in public. We were crossing a busy street, and she'd hesitated just slightly before intertwining her fingers with mine. Her grip had been warm, deliberate. Brave. Tonight, she hadn't moved at all. That's what stayed with me. Not the shove. Not even the words. But the stillness. I looked down at my empty passenger seat and let out a quiet breath. Maybe I never had a seat there, I murmured to myself. And for the first time since falling in love with her, I wondered if walking away quietly was the most dignified thing I could do. It was almost midnight when I heard the knock. Not loud. Not frantic. Just steady. I'd been sitting on my couch in the dark, the only light coming from the city outside my apartment window. I hadn't turned on the TV. Hadn't eaten. My phone lay face down on the coffee table, her missed calls still unanswered. The knock came again. I already knew it was her. When I opened the door, she was standing there in a long dark coat, the collar slightly crooked like she'd thrown it on in a hurry. Her hair, usually so composed, had loosened from its tie, soft strands falling around her face. The cool night air had tinted her cheeks pink. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Her eyes were glassy, not dramatic tears, just the quiet aftermath of holding too much in. "You left," she said softly. It wasn't an accusation. It sounded more like disbelief. I nodded once. I didn't want to make it worse. The hallway light above us flickered faintly. The world felt small. Close. She stepped inside without waiting to be invited, but not in a forceful way, more like someone who already belonged there. I closed the door gently behind her. Up close, I could see the strain in her expression. The confidence she wore so naturally at dinner was gone. In its place was something more fragile. I froze, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect him to, she stopped herself, swallowing hard. I didn't expect that. I leaned back against the door, keeping a small distance between us. Not because I wanted to. But because I wasn't sure what I was allowed to feel yet. "He's a kid," I said quietly. "He's protecting something." She shook her head. "That doesn't mean you deserved it." There it was again. Deserved. She stepped closer then, slowly, carefully, until there was only a breath of space between us. Her hand lifted, hesitated for half a second, then rested against my chest. Not possessive. Not seductive. Just grounding. Her palm was warm through my shirt. I could feel the slight tremble in her fingers. Or maybe that was my heartbeat. I didn't defend you, she said, her eyes searching mine. And I should have. The honesty in her voice made something in my chest tighten. You were trying to protect him, I replied. I was trying to protect both of you, she corrected softly. And I failed. The words hung in the air between us. I hadn't realized how much I needed her to come until she did. Not to apologize. Not to fix it instantly. Just to show up. She moved even closer, her forehead almost brushing my shoulder before she caught herself. Instead, her fingers curled slightly against my chest, gripping the fabric of my shirt like she needed something solid. You deserved that seat, she whispered. And in that moment, standing in the quiet of my dim apartment with her hand over my heart, I understood something deeper than pride or embarrassment. This wasn't just about a chair at a table. It was about whether she would choose me when it was hard. And for the first time that night, I felt the possibility that maybe, she just had. We moved to the couch without really deciding to. She sat first, smoothing her coat beneath her as if buying herself a few seconds to steady her thoughts. I took the space beside her, close enough that our knees touched, neither of us pulling away this time. The apartment was quiet, no music, no distractions. Just the faint ticking of the kitchen clock and the soft rhythm of our breathing slowly sinking. He still talks about his father like he's going to walk through the door one day, she said after a long silence. Her voice wasn't bitter. It was tired. I swallowed. I'd seen the framed photo on the hallway shelf before, her late husband, smiling confidently with an arm around a much younger version of her. I had never felt threatened by a photograph. Tonight felt different. That seat, she continued softly, was always his father's. Even after, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Even after he passed, my son refused to let anyone sit there. I didn't push it. I thought it would fade with time. And then I walked in, I said quietly. She turned toward me fully now. No. Don't do that. This isn't your fault. But it felt like it was. I'm not trying to replace him, I said, my voice lower than I expected. I never thought I was. But sitting there tonight, I realized maybe that's how it looks. Her hand found mine before I finished speaking. She didn't just hold it, she wrapped both of her hands around it, her thumbs brushing slowly over my knuckles. The gesture was tender, deliberate. Almost protective. You are not a replacement, she said firmly. You are not a stand-in. You are not a shadow. Her eyes softened, and the strength she usually carried shifted into vulnerability. You're something entirely new in my life. The words settled deep, but doubt still lingered. I'm 25, I said, letting the insecurity surface. I don't have a house full of memories. I don't have history with you that stretches back decades. Sometimes I feel like I walked into the middle of a story that was already written. She leaned closer, our shoulders touching now. I could feel the warmth of her through the thin fabric of her sweater. My life didn't stop when he died, she said quietly. It paused. And I stayed there longer than I should have because it felt safer. Her fingers tightened around mine. But you didn't walk into the middle of something finished. You walked into something that was waiting to begin again. The honesty in her voice made it hard to look away. I love my son, she continued. And I will always protect his heart. But that doesn't mean I sacrifice mine. That was the first time she'd framed it that way. Her heart. Her choice. She lifted one hand from mine and gently brushed a strand of hair away from my forehead, a small, intimate gesture that felt more meaningful than any dramatic declaration. I care about you, she said softly. Not because you're younger. Not because you're different. But because you see me. You listen. You stay. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. But love isn't just between two people anymore, I said quietly. It's bigger than that. She nodded. I know, she whispered. And in that shared understanding, that loving her meant loving the complicated spaces around her too, the weight of the night shifted from humiliation to something deeper. Not easier, but honest. We didn't fight after that night. We didn't make dramatic promises either. Instead, we did something quieter, something harder. We gave each other space. It wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. But it was noticeable. The rhythm we'd fallen into, late-night calls, spontaneous coffee runs, her stopping by after work just to sit with me for an hour, slowed to a careful pause. "I need to talk to him," she had said softly before leaving my apartment that night. Really talk to him. I told her I understood. And I meant it. But understanding something doesn't stop you from missing it. The next few days felt longer than they should have. I'd reach for my phone instinctively when something reminded me of her, a song playing in a cafe, a woman laughing in that same warm, low tone she had, then stop myself. She was fighting a different kind of battle at home. I respected that. Still, I missed the little things. The way she'd brush invisible lint from my jacket before we left her house, like she needed an excuse to touch me one more time. The way she squeezed my hand twice instead of once, our silent code that meant, "I'm here." The absence of those small gestures felt heavier than I expected. One evening, my phone buzzed with a simple text. "It's harder than I thought." I stared at it for a long moment before replying. "Take your time." She called me later that night. Her voice sounded steady, but I could hear the strain underneath. "He thinks if he accepts you," she said carefully, "it means he's letting go of his father." There was no anger in her tone. Just a mother trying to untangle grief from loyalty. "And what did you say?" I asked. There was a small pause. "I told him loving someone new doesn't erase someone you lost." That sentence stayed with me. She told her son he didn't have to see me as a father. Didn't have to give me a title that felt wrong. But he did have to respect me as someone she cared about. "I won't let him be cruel," she said quietly. "But I also won't force him to feel something he's not ready for." It was the balance I'd always admired about her, strength without harshness. After we hung up, I sat alone on my balcony, the cool evening air settling around me. I realized this was the part no one talks about in relationships like ours. Not the spark. Not the chemistry. But the waiting. The patience. The choice to stay steady when it would be easier to walk away and find something less complicated. A few days later, she stopped by unexpectedly. No dramatic entrance. No tears. She stood in my doorway again, softer this time. "He's trying," she said quietly. There was hope in her eyes, cautious, but real. And even though we didn't close the distance completely that night, when she reached for my hand before leaving, she squeezed twice. I squeezed back. And for the first time since that dinner, the space between us didn't feel like separation. It felt like something we were walking through, together. We didn't fight after that night. We didn't make dramatic promises either. Instead, we did something quieter, something harder. We gave each other space. It wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. But it was noticeable. The rhythm we'd fallen into, late-night calls, spontaneous coffee runs, her stopping by after work just to sit with me for an hour, slowed to a careful pause. "I need to talk to him," she had said softly before leaving my apartment that night. Really talk to him. I told her I understood. And I meant it. But understanding something doesn't stop you from missing it. The next few days felt longer than they should have. I'd reach for my phone instinctively when something reminded me of her, a song playing in a cafe, a woman laughing in that same warm, low tone she had, then stop myself. She was fighting a different kind of battle at home. I respected that. Still, I missed the little things. The way she'd brush invisible lint from my jacket before we left her house, like she needed an excuse to touch me one more time. The way she squeezed my hand twice instead of once, our silent code that meant, "I'm here." The absence of those small gestures felt heavier than I expected. One evening, my phone buzzed with a simple text. "It's harder than I thought." I stared at it for a long moment before replying. "Take your time." She called me later that night. Her voice sounded steady, but I could hear the strain underneath. "He thinks if he accepts you," she said carefully, "it means he's letting go of his father." There was no anger in her tone. Just a mother trying to untangle grief from loyalty. "And what did you say?" I asked. There was a small pause. "I told him loving someone new doesn't erase someone you lost." That sentence stayed with me. She told her son he didn't have to see me as a father. Didn't have to give me a title that felt wrong. But he did have to respect me as someone she cared about. "I won't let him be cruel," she said quietly. "But I also won't force him to feel something he's not ready for." It was the balance I'd always admired about her, strength without harshness. After we hung up, I sat alone on my balcony, the cool evening air settling around me. I realized this was the part no one talks about in relationships like ours. Not the spark. Not the chemistry. But the waiting. The patience. The choice to stay steady when it would be easier to walk away and find something less complicated. A few days later, she stopped by unexpectedly. No dramatic entrance. No tears. She stood in my doorway again, softer this time. "He's trying," she said quietly. There was hope in her eyes, cautious, but real. And even though we didn't close the distance completely that night, when she reached for my hand before leaving, she squeezed twice. I squeezed back. And for the first time since that dinner, the space between us didn't feel like separation. It felt like something we were walking through, together. The message came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. "Coffee on Sunday. Around 4. No pressure. Just, come." I read it 3 times before replying. "Okay." Sunday arrived slower than it should have. I changed my shirt twice. Told myself it didn't matter what I wore. Told myself this wasn't some test. But it felt like one. When I pulled into her driveway, the house looked the same as it always had, warm brick exterior, curtains half drawn, late afternoon light stretching long shadows across the lawn. Still, my chest felt tighter than it had the night of the dinner. She opened the door before I knocked. This time she wasn't dressed for a formal meal. Just jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger like that. Lighter. But there was still tension in her smile. "Hi," she said gently. "Hi." For a second, neither of us moved. Then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. It was steady. Her cheek brushed mine, warm and familiar. I felt her exhale against my neck, like she'd been holding her breath all day. My hand settled at her waist naturally, carefully, giving her space to pull back if she needed to. She didn't. When we separated, her fingers lingered at my sides for just a moment longer than necessary. Inside, the house was quieter than usual. No music. No candles. Just 3 mugs already set on the coffee table. He was sitting on the couch when we walked in. He didn't stand. Didn't smile. But he didn't glare either. Progress, I told myself. I nodded once. "Hey." He gave a short nod back. "Hey." She sat between us at first, like a quiet bridge. The conversation started stiff, school, work, neutral topics that didn't require vulnerability. I chose the armchair across from them instead of the dining table. No one mentioned it. Halfway through the coffee, there was a long silence. The kind that could tip either direction. Then he spoke. "You can sit there, if you want." He didn't look at me when he said it. His voice wasn't warm. It wasn't inviting. But it wasn't sharp either. I glanced toward the dining room. The seat. My pulse ticked in my ears. I stood slowly, not wanting the moment to feel bigger than he'd made it. When I reached the table, I paused, just for a second. "I'm not here to take anything from you," I said quietly, meeting his eyes. It wasn't a speech. Just the truth. His jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't look away this time. "I know," he muttered. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. But it was acknowledgement. When I sat down, the chair didn't feel like a victory. It felt earned. Under the table, I felt her hand find mine. Just the tips of her fingers at first. Then her palm pressing gently against my knuckles. This time, I didn't hesitate. I turned my hand over and held hers fully. Across the room, her son pretended not to notice. But he didn't look upset. And for the first time, sitting in that seat didn't feel like trespassing. It felt like the beginning of something that might actually hold. A few weeks later, we tried dinner again. No announcement. No formal reset. Just a quiet Sunday evening that felt almost ordinary. I stood at her front door with a bottle of wine in my hand, noticing how different my heartbeat felt this time. Still nervous, but steadier. Less like I was walking into judgment. More like I was walking into something shared. She opened the door with that same soft smile, but there was something new in her eyes. Confidence. Not the kind she wore for the world. The kind that comes from making a decision and standing by it. "You look nice," she said, adjusting my collar gently with her fingertips. The touch lingered a second longer than necessary, her knuckles brushing my jaw before she pulled back. Inside, the house felt warmer. Familiar. Her son was already at the table when we walked in. He gave me a brief glance, not cold, not warm. Just neutral. I greeted him the same way I would greet any other young man. Respect first. We sat down. For a split second, I hesitated near the chair. That chair. The memory flickered, the shove, the silence, the weight of not belonging. Before I could decide where to sit, he shrugged casually. "It's fine," he said. "You can sit there." No tension in his voice. No edge. Just simple acceptance. I didn't make a show of it. Didn't thank him dramatically. I just nodded once and took the seat. Dinner moved easily after that. Conversation flowed in small, natural ways. He talked about school. I listened. Asked questions without trying too hard. She watched both of us carefully at first, like someone waiting for glass to crack. It didn't. Halfway through the meal, I felt it. Her hand resting lightly on my thigh under the table. Not hidden in fear. Not hesitant. Claiming, but gentle. Her fingers pressed once, warm and steady. A silent message. "I choose you." After dinner, her son excused himself without tension. No slammed doors. No heavy sighs. Just normal. She and I stepped out onto the porch while the evening air settled cool around us. The sky was painted in deep blues and fading gold. The world felt calm in a way it hadn't a few weeks ago. She wrapped her arms around me slowly, sliding them beneath my jacket. I felt her cheek press against my chest, her breath warm through the fabric of my shirt. "You stayed," she whispered. Her voice carried both gratitude and relief. I wrapped my arms around her in return, holding her a little tighter than usual. My chin rested lightly against the top of her head. "Only because you're worth staying for," I replied quietly. She pulled back just enough to look up at me. Her eyes searched mine, not for doubt, not for hesitation, but for certainty. And this time, there wasn't any fear behind them. Loving her had never been simple. It meant patience. Respect. Understanding that I wasn't stepping into an empty space. But standing there on that porch, her hands warm against my back, I understood something clearly. The seat had never been about replacing someone. It was about being chosen in the present. And tonight, she chose me openly. Not just at the table. But in her life.